Hey folks, it's Joe at Emerald City Orchids, and today we're going to be talking about America's favorite orchid, Phalaenopsis. Now, it was for about 100 years, everybody's favorite orchid in America was Cattleya, but in the last 30 years, it's definitely Phalaenopsis, and it's very understandable why. Phalaenopsis has this beautiful flower. It comes in a lot of different colors. It's very easy to take care of. The flowers last 1 to 3 months per bloom, and it absolutely loves temperatures inside the house, making this one a real winner. Now, a lot of people want to know, how do I take care of my Phalaenopsis? You may have bought one at a big box store. You may have bought a Phalaenopsis at a grocery store. They sell them everywhere right now. Here's the first thing you need to know about your Phalaenopsis. The ones they're selling in the big stores are all very fine plants, except that they come in a pot that doesn't drain. Orchids grow in trees. They need a bright light that's diffused, and when they get rained on, the water comes down very heavy and then it drains away. So it's very important that orchids drain. When we sell a Phalaenopsis, we sell it in a pot that has a hole in the bottom, and the hole is lined up with the hole in the bottom of the plant. If you get one in the grocery store, it comes in a very nice ceramic, but chances are it doesn't have a hole in it. And if you water that plant, the water drips down to the bottom, and then you start making root soup. When the roots sit in water for a long time, they all rot, and it's not good for the plant. So one of the first things you need to do is consider changing the pot, or if you like the pot that it came in, find a way to elevate it just a little bit. Can you put it on top of a rock, a marble, a styrofoam packing peanut? Put something in the bottom of the pot so that the orchid never sits directly in water. Now, how should I water my Phalaenopsis? People ask all the time. It doesn't really matter how you want to water as long as it's getting sufficient water. I personally, at home, like to take it to the kitchen sink, just run it under the sink until water is flushing through, 5 or 10 seconds, then let it drain, then put it back in my draining ceramic pot. Other folks, they like to soak the orchid. If you want to soak it in water, you can soak it in there and then let it drain and then put it back in the pot. What's important is that the roots need to be wet for a period of about 10 minutes. A minimum of 10 minutes the roots need to be wet. If they're wet longer than that, it's okay as long as they begin the process of drying out. Typically, in most homes, you want to water a Phalaenopsis every 7 to 10 days, so about once a week. For me, I water all of the Phalaenopsis on Sunday, and it goes great in the house. Controversial topic. Should you water with ice cubes? A lot of people have done this, and it's because there are some Phalaenopsis being marketed as things you just add an ice cube. What you're doing when you water with an ice cube is you're portion feeding a plant that doesn't drain. A Phalaenopsis this size will consume about 1.5 ounces of water every week. So if you throw in an ice cube, it's about 1.5 ounces of water. As it melts into the material, the medium, the plant will absorb it, and that's how much water it needs in a week. The problem is that this is a tropical plant, and as the plant matures and new roots start to form higher up, an ice cube sitting on the roots can kill them. So if you want to maintain the plant for a long term, you can still do the same trick, just use a shot glass. Why don't you pour a shot glass in there, or if it's a heavy drinker like yours truly, make it a double. And then put it in there once a week like you did with the ice cube, and the plant will absorb it all. You're portion feeding it, and you don't have to worry about the pot that doesn't drain as much. However, I still think it's best if you can flush it with water or give it a healthy amount of water and then let it drain out, because that's more like what they have in nature. But if the ice cube thing has been working for you, I would suggest try doing the shot glass thing as the roots start to grow in, that the plant doesn't get damage on the roots. When the orchid is getting large, the roots will do two things. They will sit in the pot and collect water, and they will also go out into the air to explore, to see what's going on in the world. These roots are how the orchid sense things like, where is the light coming from? Where is the water coming from? Is there more wood that I can grow up? Because these grow in trees. If you have a lot of roots coming around, I like to say, if it looks like spaghetti, it's ready. When you want to repot it, you want to repot it in a slightly bigger pot only if it's got a lot of roots. If the roots look like this, see if you can repot it back into the same pot, which you should try to do every couple of years or so, just so that the material inside isn't biodegrading. What's very important for a lot of orchids is that when they're growing in the tree, The roots hold onto the tree by wrapping around the branch. If the roots wrap all the way around the branch and they start to grow over other roots, the plant feels safe because the flower is very heavy. If it blooms, the flower can pull the plant off the tree. So when we put them in these little pots, we're fooling the plant because it grows the roots around the edge of the inside of the pot. And when the root is grown over the other root, the plant can sense that it's root bound and will start to flower. If you put it in a bigger pot, you're not going to hurt the plant, but it's going to have to fill the entire circumference of the pot with roots before it'll flower, and that can take a very long time. And we like the flowers on this. This is a lovely plant, but you would never grow this plant if this was all it did. We want these flowers. So make sure you keep them in tighter pots when you're potting them up. A lot of people ask, what should I pot my orchid in? Yours is in bark, but I see somebody else has theirs in moss. Is there a way that's correct? No. What is correct is what works for you best as the grower. For me, moss is better because if I forget to water, the moss holds a little bit of water in it, and it's more forgiving when I'm growing at home. I'm a very busy person, and I don't always remember to water my plants. But for some people, they water very regularly. They want to water every single week at the same time. For those people, maybe bark is better. If you tend to water more and your plants have problems with root rot, I would suggest switching from moss to bark. If you're the type of person that forgets and needs a little bit of a safety, then move from bark to moss. But whichever way you want to grow is really what's best, as long as the plant is getting bigger over time and it's healthy and it flowers, whatever you're doing is correct. Now, a lot of folks ask, this orchid was beautiful, it's done blooming. What do I do with it now? In your house, you've got really three basic options. The first option is you take a plant like this that's bloomed out, and we'll just pretend for a moment that these flowers have completely bloomed. What you'll do is you'll go back and you'll look to see where the first flower was, and at that point you can make a cut. If it hasn't come out already, this little branch can come out later. On this particular plant, you can see on the second node there's a branch that's starting to form here. So this is a species that's capable of making new branches out of the secondary node. When the branch comes out, sometimes it also has a node on it. It's tertiary node. Right here, that second little cat claw looking bit. It can also produce a branch on occasion. So what you would do with this is using sterile clippers, you would cut it above the nodes, which is where the first flower was. You can see the pock mark from the flower. And you cut it there. And if it hasn't done so already, it will make the branch here, and on this one it might make the branch there. We don't do this often in the store because people never buy the one that's got the cut stump. So we oftentimes will have to make a new flower. How do you know what to do or how to make a new flower? Oftentimes an orchid like this grown in your house can actually get locked. If you are using your thermostat and your house is well insulated, you live in a place that's maybe hot in summer and cold in winter, your house is well insulated, and your thermostat keeps the temperature very, very consistent. Sometimes it's too consistent. Your orchid will grow and grow and grow and never bloom because it doesn't experience any kind of seasonal change. One of the easiest tricks in the world with Phalaenopsis is to simulate a tropical winter by letting the temperature drop a little bit. If you have a colder room, maybe a laundry room or a garage, or maybe you have a guest room where you don't turn the heat on, or a single pane window somewhere, or you've got some ledge that's a little bit cooler than the rest of the house by a window, that you can set the plant in it, leave it there. When the temperature dips at night, it'll get a little bit cooler in that spot than it does in the rest of the house. After a week or two, the plant has experienced a tropical winter, and it will bloom again. That's how you can trigger a Phalaenopsis into flowering. But the question is, how do you know when it's ready? A lot of orchids, including Phalaenopsis, flower from their newest growth. And in this case, where it's making leaf over leaf and it's climbing like a ladder, going straight up, you typically have to have 2 new leaves form, one on each side, since the last time it bloomed, and it will flower again. We have a rule called 2 leaves above the node. The flower comes from the same spot on these. If you look at the leaf, it's bisected. And there's a line that goes down the middle of the leaf. And if you follow that line to the middle of the plant, you'll see the spot where it's bloomed. You can see the stump there where it bloomed. Now, if you're trying to do the temperature thing, you need to count because it needs 2 leaves above the space where it's bloomed. So where my finger is, where it bloomed last time, it has these 2 leaves above it. If you look at this plant like clockwork, on the other side, a new leaf is forming in a space that has 2 leaves above it. This orchid is behaving very, very normally. If you put it through the temperature change too early, you can make a leaf form in the crown of the plant. And if it does that, then the plant stops growing leaves altogether. And if you have that situation, there's really only one thing that can save you, and that's a basal kiki. If you get a kiki coming out of the side here, it's called a basal kiki. Sometimes you can get one growing up, a new plant growing up on the leaf of on the flower stem, and sometimes that thing, if it gets roots that are 4 inches long, you can break that off and plant it on its own, and it's a whole new plant. Which gives you the third option. You can leave the thing alone. If it's done blooming and the tip is still alive, it can still produce new flowers even months later after going through one of those temperature changes. But if you leave it alone and that flower stem stays up there, sometimes it makes a keiki up on the flower stem. If it does that, it's less likely to bloom again. Still a very cool, fun thing to have happen, but if you want flowers to come back faster, you should probably at that point consider cutting off the old stem and waiting for the 2 new leaves. And if you see a spot that's got 2 leaves above the node, then you know to put it through a temperature change and it will begin blooming. Phalaenopsis are very strong plants. They can be grown actually quite cold. You can take them into the 40s if the plant is dry, and they can go over 100 as long as they're getting sufficient water and plenty of air movement. That's not to say that they're comfortable at those extremes. They really do prefer it between 55 and 85 if you can stay to that range. So inside your house is perfect. And like we discussed, temperature change helps the flower stem initiate. But temperature change is a two-edged sword. After the flower has initiated, if it's still going through temperature change, especially if it's getting very cold very quickly, you can experience what's called a bud blast. That's when a little flower, like this one, starts to shrivel up and die. This one's turning this yellow and pink color, and it's not going to make it because it got too cold overnight, and with this type of thing, all you can do is pluck it off. If you buy the thing from a store in winter, especially if you get it from a section that's by the front door, and the door is opening and closing and opening and closing with every customer that comes in, it brings in that cold winter air. It can oftentimes cause what's called a bud blast on the plant. If you're experiencing a lot of bud blasts on your orchids, try moving it to an area that's got a more consistent temperature. That is, if it's next to a window, move it to the center of the room. And if it's in the center of the room and doesn't flower, put it next to that window. You can control your orchid by moving it from areas that have more and less temperature fluctuation. People often ask, how often do I need to fertilize this orchid? And the answer is not very often. In fact, at home, I only fertilize a few times a year. Don't tell anybody. But here at the nursery, we fertilize often on a very, very low dose. Typically, you want to fertilize it maybe once every other or every third or fourth watering. So if you fertilize a couple of times a month, you're going to have a really nice orchid. Again, a low dose is important, but here's what's really the thing that you've got to remember. If you have light, water, and temperature all in balance, you're going to have a good orchid. If you add fertilizer to that, you're going to have a great orchid. But if you have fertilizer and the wrong temperature balance, it's not going to make your orchid that's struggling become good. Light, water, and temperature need to be imbalanced, and adding fertilizer will really take you to the next level. Now, Phalaenopsis are subject to some pests and diseases that are very common with orchids. One of them that absolutely loves this is mealybug. You'll oftentimes find mealybug under the leaf or in the crown or right behind where the flower is connected. Those are the spots where it likes to hide. Mealybug is actually fairly easy to kill. You can blast it off with water to get rid of most of the adults, and then what you can't see are all the larvae. If you can get yourself some horticultural oil, a neem oil or a dormant oil, and some people even use tea tree oil, and you dilute it in a little bit of water and spray it in the nooks and crannies, you'll kill a lot of the larvae that are on the plant. Now, if you have mealy and it keeps coming back again and again and again, it's oftentimes in the pot and it's feeding off the root. in which case you need to repot your orchid. Take it out of the pot, take all of the material off and get some fresh material. Wash the cup out with some soap and water. Get some fresh material after you wash the plant off. And again, you can use a little bit of soap on the plant as well. And then rinse it off and plop it back in the pot with some fresh material. You'll kill anything that is in the pot with the plant. Another thing that can oftentimes happen with Phalaenopsis is it can get fungal infections. You can have a little bit of fungus start to grow on the leaf. To prevent this, a little air movement goes a long way, and this is true for many of your orchids, especially the tree dwellers. They like a gentle breeze. If you have an area where your orchids are growing, especially if it's a humid area, consider getting the cheap little $10 fan online and just get a little bit of air movement going through that area to help the plants equalize when they're trying to off-gas and do their water evaporations. If you have a little bit of air movement, you're going to reduce a lot of fungal infections. Another thing that can happen with Phalaenopsis is they can get weird spots. Spots come from a lot of things. The first thing that causes spots is if you leave the orchid in the sun, it can burn a hole. And another thing that can cause spots is by having water sit on the leaf overnight. So pick a spot that's bright with not a lot of direct sun. And when you water, water in the morning, and that way, when the water's dripping out, the plant is going to bed dry on the leaves. This plant has also on it some very weird, kind of a light gray patterning on it, and that's from fertilizer. When the water evaporates and there's still fertilizer in it, the residue stays on the leaf. With this, you can just wipe it off with your hands, or you can get a little damp paper towel and wipe the leaves off. Again, oils are very effective at also at keeping the leaves shiny. They're not just anti-insecticidal, but they keep the leaves shiny. And then another thing that can sometimes happen is that you can get virus on these plants. Now, virus most often comes from using cutting tools that are not sterile. If you start to see rings on the plant and the rings start to stretch, like you've got your fingers in a rubber band and you're pulling it this way, or you get a mottling that is both light and dark at the same times, that can oftentimes be a virus. There's another mottling that can happen with mites. The most important thing with these orchids is to try to keep them clean. So if you have a new one that you're bringing into your home from the store or here in the nursery or anywhere, we do recommend that you isolate that plant for a while just to make sure it's clean before introducing it into the area where all of the other ones grow. I hope this video was helpful for you in understanding Phalaenopsis. It's a great orchid. If you've never grown an orchid before, start with this one. It grows well in the house. Pick a spot that's bright enough where you can read, that doesn't have the sun shining right on the plant, and give it water about once a week and make sure it drains. Otherwise, this thing is a slam dunk. Very easy plant to grow. It can grow well in almost any house in America, and the flowers will last 1 to 3 months per bloom. If you haven't tried it before, give it a try. Great first orchid.